I want you to picture a morning so cold that the sky looks, well, practically white. It is January 15th, 1947 in Los
Oh,
Angeles.
wow. Yeah, a real chill in the air for LA.
Exactly. And you are walking through Limert Park, specifically past this vacant lot on South Norton Avenue. The grass under your shoes is damp.
Just a totally normal, quiet residential neighborhood, right?
Yeah, incredibly normal. And as you're walking, maybe you're holding the hand of your young daughter, you glance over at the grass near the sidewalk and you see something.
Something that just completely shatters that morning routine.
Right. At first glance, your brain tries to make sense of it, so it tells you that you are looking at a pale, discarded mannequin, like from a local department store.
Because it's just so impossibly still.
Yes, exactly. But as you take a few steps closer, the horrifying reality sets in. You aren't looking at a mannequin. It is Elizabeth Short.
It is the kind of discovery that honestly permanently alters the psychological landscape of a city.
Totally. The woman who found that scene obviously called the police, and what those officers walked into remains one of the most disturbing, heavily scrutinized, and legendary unsolved cases in American history.
Without a doubt, it's infamous.
Right. And for 77 years, Hollywood has sold us this noir myth. We've all seen the Pulp Fiction covers, the sensationalized movies, the endless rumors about the Black Dahlia.
Yeah, it's become more of a ghost story than a real case for a lot of people.
Exactly. But recently, I've been doing a deep dive into the compiled files and documents in the source material called The Biltmore Ghost, The Life and Death of Elizabeth Short. And I realized something pretty shocking.
That's that.
The actual documented truth about this case, the LAPD cover-ups, the media manipulation, and a killer hiding in plain sight, it is far more terrifying than the fiction.
Oh, 100%. The reality is so much darker.
So we are going to tear up that tabloid script today. Okay,
Yes.
let's unpack this. Most of us already know the gruesome headlines, but when you look at the actual mechanics of what happened, how does a single crime generate this level of absolute, enduring cultural obsession?
Well, I think it happens because the details of the crime itself almost defy human comprehension. Like, they're just so extreme.
Right, it's hard to even process.
Exactly. But to truly understand it, we have to look past those gruesome headlines and analyze the mechanisms at play here.
Which is exactly our mission for this deep dive.
Yeah. We're going to examine the very specific psychology of the person who committed this act, how the media ecosystem of 1940s Los Angeles aggressively manipulated the narrative, and ultimately what appears to be a massive systemic institutional failure.
A failure that literally allowed a killer to walk away.
Precisely.
Let's start with the physical evidence, or rather, the glaring lack of it at that vacant lot. Because the state of Elizabeth Short's body was just staggering.
It really was.
She was completely drained of blood. I mean, every single drop. Her body had been cleanly bisected at the waist. She was scrubbed entirely clean, her hair had been washed, and she was posed.
Posed in a very deliberate way.
Right. Her arms were raised slightly above her head, her legs were kept perfectly straight, and she was deliberately positioned on that wet grass so she would be highly visible from the street.
Like an exhibition.
Yeah, exactly. Her face had also been slashed from the corners of her mouth out toward her ears, which is a wound later referred to as a Glasgow smile.
And amidst all of that horrific trauma, the medical examiners noted a detail that completely changes the trajectory of the investigation.
Okay, what was that?
There was zero blood at the scene. Not a single drop in the grass or on the sidewalk.
Wow. Which means she wasn't killed there. The killer transported her.
Exactly.
But wait, walk me through the logistics of that. Transporting a body in that condition, posing it in a residential neighborhood, it feels like a morbid, grotesque art installation or something.
It really does have that theatrical quality to it.
Right. And when we hear about a crime this violent, the traditional narrative is always a madman, you know? We picture a frenzy.
Yeah, like someone just losing total control in an alleyway somewhere.
Exactly. But I have to push back on that trope based on these files. Was this actually a frenzy, or was this something far more terrifyingly calculated?
What's fascinating here is that the physical evidence points entirely away from a frenzy. Let's look at the bisection, for instance.
Okay.
This was not done with a crude hacking motion or a saw. The medical examiners were incredibly specific about this in the documents.
Right, they were very detailed.
It was a clean, precise cut directly through the intervertebral disc located between the second and third lumbar vertebrae.
Okay, wait, stop right there. Why the second and third lumbar vertebrae specifically? Is that just like where the killer happened to strike?
Not at all. That specific spot is the exact natural hinge of the human spine.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. If you cut exactly there, you bypass the bone entirely. You are only slicing through cartilage and tissue.
That is deeply unsettling. That tells us the killer didn't just have surgical tools. He had intimate, practiced knowledge of human anatomy.
Absolutely. Furthermore, the organs have been removed and then carefully replaced, and the body was drained through very specific surgical incisions.
So to cut precisely through that hinge, to bypass the bone, that requires a scalpel and mastery, not a saw and a fit of rage.
Exactly. This requires a terrifying amount of patience. It implies a methodical killer who possessed specific medical knowledge, access to surgical tools, and crucially, the absolute privacy and time required to execute this without interruption.
Because that would take forever, right?
Oh yeah. To drain a human body of every drop of blood, wash the hair, scrub the skin, and perform complex surgical dissections takes hours, if not an entire day.
That is just chilling.
The LAPD knew from day one that they were not hunting a random transient. They were hunting someone with advanced medical training and a secure location.
The killer treated Elizabeth's body with this cold, clinical detachment. He sterilized the scene and turned her into a prop.
He stripped away her humanity entirely.
But what really strikes me as we go through the Biltmore ghost files is that the killer wasn't the only one who treated her like an object.
Oh, you mean the press?
Yeah. To understand why this case went cold, we really have to look at how the media actively sterilized her humanity to create a pulp fiction character to sell papers.
They needed a protagonist for their horror story, and the real Elizabeth Short was just too complex, too human for a simple headline.
Right, exactly.
So they constructed a myth out of the fragments of her life.
Let's talk about the real Elizabeth Short, because her actual background explains so much about the psychology of the era. She was born on July 29th, 1924, in Hyde Park, Massachusetts.
Okay.
She was one of 5 daughters, and she had this foundation of profound instability from the start. She suffered from severe asthma.
Which was a big deal back then.
Huge deal. It meant she spent her winters migrating to Florida and eventually California just to breathe properly.
Constant uprooting.
Yes. Plus, her father, Cleo Short, actually faked his own suicide when she was just 6 years old.
Oh my God.
Yeah, he abandoned his car near a bridge and just vanished. They did briefly reconnect years later in California, but the damage was absolutely done.
That kind of childhood creates a very specific psychology. You have abandonment, chronic illness, and constant relocation.
Right.
It builds a person who is highly adaptable, constantly seeking security, and perhaps prone to reinvention because their foundation was never solid to begin with.
Exactly. By the time she is 22 years old in Los Angeles, her life mirrors the reality of so many people today. I always think of her like a 1940s version of a modern-day gig worker.
Oh, that's a really good comparison.
Yeah, like a young creative moving to a big, expensive city without a safety net. She had no steady income. She was bouncing between cheap hotels and the couches of acquaintances.
Just trying to get by.
Exactly. She frequented diners and bars around Hollywood, surviving purely on her charm and her ability to read people, hoping for a break in the sun-bleached glamour of Los Angeles.
And that survival mechanism, the charming of strangers, the networking in cheap bars, that is exactly what the press weaponized to rewrite her history.
It makes me so mad. Like, let's look at the nickname Black Dahlia. It didn't come from some underworld syndicate or a dark secret life.
No, not at all.
The files show it was given to her by regulars at a Long Beach drugstore she frequented.
Wow, just a drugstore.
Yeah, it was just a casual, everyday reference to her striking dark hair, her preference for black clothing, and a play on the title of a recently released film called The Blue Dahlia.
Which is just devastating when you think about how it was used against her.
Completely. The press took this drugstore nickname and painted her as a fantasist, a drifter, a woman of quote-unquote loose character.
They really ran with it.
They did. The Hearst papers and the rest of the 1940s media machine essentially told the public, well, look at how she lived. What did she expect?
That is the ultimate tragedy of Los Angeles.
Right. It's a city that historically eats young, ambitious women alive. And the moment it consumed Elizabeth Short, the city immediately blamed her for her own demise.
It is a classic mechanism of psychological distancing.
What do you mean by that?
Well, if the newspapers can convince the public that the victim somehow invited the violence through her lifestyle, then the public can feel safe. They could say, I don't live like that, so I won't be murdered.
That makes total sense.
But the media constructed a completely fictionalized narrative. When we trace the actual factual timeline of her final days, We don't find a reckless woman courting danger.
No, we really don't.
We find a horrifying void that the press simply couldn't explain.
Let's lay out that timeline because it is agonizing for you to hear. The final confirmed sighting of Elizabeth Short alive is on January 9th, 1947.
Okay.
She is at the Biltmore Hotel in downtown LA. Now, the Biltmore isn't some seedy, off-the-beaten-path motel.
Not at all.
No, it is this grand, opulent building with marble floors and gilded ceilings. It's the kind of place where you feel important just standing in the lobby.
Very high society.
Exactly. She is seen making a call from a payphone near the entrance. She hangs up, she walks out the front doors, and then absolute silence.
She just vanishes.
6 full days pass before her body is found in Leimert Park on January 15th.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, those 6 missing days represent the darkest reality of this case.
Yeah, they really do.
The medical examiner found ligature marks on her wrists and ankles, along with signs of prolonged abuse.
God.
This categorically indicates that she was kept alive for at least part of that time in captivity. She was held somewhere against her will before the killer began his surgical process.
Imagine being a detective in that room, trying to piece together 6 days of a ghost, and then here's where it gets really interesting.
Oh yeah, the communicate.
Right, because after the body is found and the city is in an absolute panic, the killer decides to reach out. On January 24th, which is 9 days after the discovery in the vacant lot, a package arrives at the Los Angeles Examiner.
The biggest paper in town.
Yep. Inside this package is Elizabeth Short's birth certificate, her social security card, her personal address book, and photographs of her with various men.
And critically, all of those items had been thoroughly washed in gasoline.
Let me pause you there. Why gasoline specifically? Wouldn't, like, water or soap do the trick?
Gasoline acts as a powerful solvent. It doesn't just wipe away a fingerprint, it completely breaks down and dissolves the natural oils from human skin.
Wow.
Yeah, it is a literal chemical sterilization of the evidence.
So he is incredibly meticulous, and included with all of the sterilized evidence is a note made out of cut-out newspaper letters.
Classic.
Right. It says, quote, "Here is Dahlia's belongings. Letter to follow."
So arrogant.
But wait, I have to push back on the killer's logic here. Mailing a package to the biggest paper in town seems incredibly reckless.
It does seem that way.
If you are a meticulous surgeon who just pulled off the perfect crime, why not just disappear? Why send the package to the media instead of the police? Doesn't that just invite chaos and tip off the entire city?
It does invite chaos, but it's calculated chaos. It's not just a taunt, it's a psychological firewall.
A firewall.
He's essentially acting as his own PR firm, using the media to control the narrative while completely sterilizing the physical evidence. By sending it to the Examiner, he bypassed the LAPD entirely.
Oh, that's wild.
Right. The police investigated over 150 suspects. It was one of the largest manhunts in their history. But the killer's communication strategy, including later letters that were incredibly vague and playful, showed a supreme, almost theatrical confidence.
He was playing a game.
Exactly. He didn't want a quiet, strategic game of cat and mouse with detectives. He was treating the LAPD like a minor inconvenience.
That level of supreme arrogance, I mean, it points directly to someone who felt entirely insulated from the consequences.
They were very powerful.
Yeah. Someone who understood the power structure of Los Angeles and knew the rules just didn't apply to them. Which brings us to arguably the most compelling and deeply hidden suspect in the entire 77-year history of this case.
A man who genuinely believed he was untouchable.
Yep, George Hodel.
George Hodel.
Yes. In 2003, Steve Hodel published a massive investigation called Black Dahlia Avenger.
Such a landmark book.
Totally. Now, Steve Hodel wasn't just some armchair internet sleuth. He was a former LAPD homicide detective himself.
A real professional.
Exactly. He spent years investigating the evidence, and he came to a staggering conclusion. The killer was his own father, Dr. George Hodel.
When you analyze the profile of George Hodel, the pieces align with terrifying precision.
They really do.
He wasn't just a doctor. He was a brilliant physician running a prominent clinic, highly educated, and he possessed the exact surgical skills and medical tools required to perform the bisection between those lumbar vertebrae.
And the draining of the body.
Exactly. Furthermore, he was deeply entrenched in Los Angeles high society.
Now, I have to push back here for a second. Having surgical skills and being a prominent doctor doesn't automatically make you a gruesome murderer.
Fair point.
Right. There were thousands of doctors in Los Angeles in 1947. Isn't a former detective jumping to accuse his own father a massive potentially biased leap?
It would be if it were only based on his medical background.
Hmm.
But we have to look at Hodell's specific position in the ecosystem of 1940s Los Angeles.
Okay, what was his position?
He had connections in the art world, the medical community, and the criminal underworld. He was known to run a discreet abortion clinic for Hollywood elites and LAPD brass at a time when the procedure was highly illegal.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, that meant he held leverage. He knew the dirty secrets of the powerful people in the city. He was a man with profound insulating influence.
It's not just circumstantial evidence about his influence, because there are actual audio tapes.
The tapes are incredible.
Let's lay out how this came to light for you. In 1950, George Hodell's own secretary accused him of molesting his own daughter.
It's horrifying.
Truly. Because the accusation was so severe, the LAPD actually bugged his home. They planted hidden microphones.
Which was a big deal back then.
Yeah, very rare. And on those tapes, they captured George Hodel saying, and this is a direct quote from the transcripts, "Supposing I did kill the Black Dahlia. They couldn't prove it now. They can't talk to my secretary anymore because she's dead."
That is a statement made with the exact same supreme confidence as the person who mailed a gasoline-soaked package to the examiner.
Exactly. And the craziest part, his secretary actually did suffer a fatal, highly suspicious overdose right before she was scheduled to testify against him.
How convenient.
Right. So what does this all mean? How on earth could the police ignore a recorded tape of a man practically confessing to the Black Dahlia murder right after a key witness conveniently dies?
This raises an important question about the nature of systemic corruption in post-World War II Los Angeles.
It has to be corruption.
It is. The LAPD in the late 40s and early 50s was notoriously intertwined with the city's power brokers.
Right.
Despite having a bugged recording of him referencing the murder and the highly suspicious death of a witness, the LAPD quietly dropped the investigation.
They just let it go.
They buried the audio recordings deep in their vaults. George Hodo realized the heat was finally on, and he fled the United States for Asia in 1950.
And he never came back.
No, he never returned to face justice, and he died a free man, uncharged, at the age of 91 in 1999.
It is infuriating. Steve Hodel firmly believed that his father's elite connections and the leverage he held over city officials insulated him entirely.
It makes perfect sense.
This wasn't just a case of overworked detectives bungling a clue at a crime scene. This transforms from a case of tragic police incompetence into an active, deliberate institutional cover-up.
The mechanism of corruption here is so clear. The department chose to protect a wealthy, connected physician.
And by extension, all his powerful friends.
Exactly. They chose to protect the secrets of the elite over securing justice for a 22-year-old girl who was living on the fringes of society.
It makes you look at the entire history of this case differently. We started this deep dive looking at the physical mechanics of a gruesome, almost theatrical crime scene in a vacant lot.
We did.
We walked through how the 1940s media machine completely assassinated the character of a 22-year-old dreamer, reducing her to a sensationalized nickname just to sell newspapers.
Stripping away her humanity.
Right. And we end up looking at a horrifying tale of untouchable power, wealth, and systemic police corruption.
Which brings us back to why looking past the Hollywood myth matters to you today.
Yes. Why does it matter?
It actively challenges us to reflect on how we consume true crime. It is a stark reminder that the victims behind these legendary cases are real people.
Real human beings.
Her name was Elizabeth Short. When we default to using the catchy, dehumanizing nicknames bestowed by a sensationalist press, we are inadvertently participating in the very system that failed her.
Wow, that's a powerful point.
We strip away the person and leave only the tabloid myth.
Her name was Elizabeth Short. And I want to leave you with one final, lingering thought to mull over today. Something that builds on the sheer scale of the corruption we've just discussed.
Okay.
When former LAPD detective Steve Hodel dug into his father's past, he didn't just believe his father killed Elizabeth Short. He believed his father, George Hodel, committed a series of murders across Los Angeles in the 1940s.
A sustained pattern of violence hidden in plain sight.
Right. So think about this. If the LAPD actively buried audio tapes and dropped major investigations to protect a well-connected, wealthy man with leverage in the Elizabeth Short case, how many other quote-unquote unsolved murders from that exact era were actually the work of George Hodel?
Oh, that is a terrifying thought.
By burying the truth just to protect the ecosystem of their own elite, the LAPD didn't just deny justice to a 22-year-old girl. They may have secretly given a serial killer absolute unchecked immunity to keep hunting. Think about that the next time you hear a story about a famous cold case. We will see you next time.